Folks, thank you again for tuning in to Legends and Lies. The title of the show tells you that we're going to cover stories. We're going to cover the human experience. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the American people, but very specifically, the ones that are not having such a good time here. We see the exit polls from the presidential election last year. To me, I read that when 70% of Americans said life here is pretty damn tough. It's pretty difficult. And why is that? How, when we look outside our window, any window you're looking out of mostly, where do you see the struggle? Are the trees struggling? Is the yard worried about when it'll rain next? Are the birds in the trees curious and starting to stress out about the worm population? Are they ever wondering about the storm that's come before coming again? Where's the struggle? And we're part of that world. We're part of that world, right? When you have a free moment, Google for yourself astronaut moonlander, moon buggy. And just capture for a second a little picture of this moon buggy. God knows why they sent a golf cart up to the moon. But just picture that for a second, an astronaut driving a moon buggy on the moon. Because the next time you get into your vehicle, it's the same situation. You're driving a moon buggy. You're driving a buggy on a planet. And we've lost sight of that. Humankind has lost sight of what living actually is. And so when we talk about the legend of America, the American dream, and it's spoken about in the news all the time, and you'll find out pretty quickly that, yes, I do talk about the news, but I'm not going to keep talking about the news, because the news to me is just all the signs of the symptoms of a very difficult life. But the symptoms aren't the problem. We can't treat symptoms. We can treat problems. And the first problem, and it's the biggest one, is that our government, full of people, good people, I'm sure. This isn't blame, right? We're not going to get into the blame game. Other hosts can get into that stuff and who did what and who did it when, what'd you know when you knew it. We just want to get into what will help you and what helps me enjoy my time here on the planet with so many reasons and so many forces that are causing us to struggle. And so the first perspective to understand is that this isn't your fault. You weren't born, and humanity and God, the creator, and Mother Nature didn't start getting it wrong. How a planet could support humankind in a way that suffering, constant suffering, wouldn't be part of the experience. Because it never used to be. Yes, there were the plagues. Yes, there were the floods, the droughts, the terrible kings and the terrible queens, and the warfare, and babies dying at childbirth, and mothers dying at childbirth, and all of that stuff. And it still happens today. But what didn't used to exist in our existence was governments full of people who had no idea what they were doing, with total control over how we live, and the influence of this one thing that is causing the suffering in humanity around the globe. And that is governments presented with bills. They don't have the money to pay. They print the money. They create money out of thin air. They pay bills with fakeness. And that causes the cost of living to surge higher. Every time they introduce money that shouldn't be in the system, it causes everything you have to spend money on to go higher. Couple data points. Don't want to make this an econ lesson, but just as an example, from 2010, so we had the Great Recession, lots of financial troubles. To me, it was the end of our economy running on its own steam. It was the end of that. Literally, like if you got your allowance as a kid and you wanted a video game, and it cost $25 and you had $12, you didn't get a video game. Your parents said, well, you'll have to save for that. My parents would have said, well, maybe there's more chores you can do, mow some yards or something to get that money quicker. But you won't have that video game until you've saved the money to buy it. And that's not how the government works today, but it's how it used to work. How it works today is that since 2010, commodity prices are up 400%. And you could say, well, I don't care, because if wages were up 400%, then there's an offset. Doesn't bother you a bit. But wages are only up 80%. Wages are only up 1/5 of how much the cost of living has grown by in the last 15 years. And debt has surged along with that. And debt isn't debt. The federal debt is just a number that records and shows us how many bills, the total of all of the bills that came to Washington that they didn't have the money to pay. That number, 37 trillion, just shows you the size of bills the money wasn't there to pay. It's not debt, because when debt exists, people have done some research on the ability for the borrower to repay the money. Are you going through your day thinking that the government somehow is going to repay $37 trillion? Or the $1 trillion it's creating on average every 6 months? That somehow they're working behind the scenes? And I know we have an incredible capitalist in the White House right now. President Trump spent obviously the majority of his career building buildings and casinos and a TV show. And so you would think, man, if someone could turn this around and get the country to create revenue in ways that it hasn't, then it might have the money to pay most or all of those bills that the government's faced with every year. And I don't know if I'm going to get into it on this episode, but that's just not mathematically possible. One perspective to just take you away from the math problem for a second is Einstein was very famous for saying lots of things. And one of them that's applicable here is he said, the mind that created the problem cannot possess the solution. So how I interpret that into what I'm speaking about is that Washington is creating the problem. And Wall Street and whoever is involved with playing with that artificial money and loves when it comes, you see how the market seems to jump when they're talking about cutting interest rates, making money easier to access because it has a lower cost to borrow, and how the world just screams up and down about how wonderful that sounds. That's a sickness. That's a sickness. When you look back at charts, and you can Google any of this, you can look at what average interest rates were in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They were around 6%. So it was normal to cost 6 pennies to borrow $1. And today the world at large seems to only be happy if it's a penny, or half a penny, or a quarter of a penny. Make it as cheap as you can. Why? Why would the world need constant access to cheap money? Why would the world need to be flooded with money? Because those in charge of the money aren't very good at how it's created or how it's spent. And they certainly aren't actually at the core of all of this. They aren't any good at actually understanding what the problem actually is. And again, not going to make this an econ session, but for my people, my fellow Americans, 70% of you who said life in America is extremely tough and not much fun, this is why. It's because you know 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that your earnings are not going to overwhelm your bills. And that takes me to my first article, Wall Street Journal article. It's a beautiful story, beautiful story. In the footnotes, we'll reference this and the author of the article so they can get credit for the work they did. It takes place in the Empire State. New York was once known as the Empire State. So much manufacturing, so much finance, so much leadership, resources. Obviously, it's a centerpiece of the Civil War and the War of Independence, mostly, George Washington. But long ago, so much manufacturing used to occur out in New York, they named it the Empire State. And this article talks about a great, wonderful, historic legend of business, the International Business Machines, IBM. And this isn't any blame ever against any company, because we don't need to waste time doing that. I just saw an article the other day where the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, which is the largest in the world, divested itself of Caterpillar stock because their bulldozers are being used in Gaza. Is Caterpillar the cause of the problem in Gaza? You know, when you look at why Cuba is still communist, that's just because the people aren't willing to sacrifice the life they possess today for future generations to overthrow that regime. That's what makes America unique. There are our ancestors that were willing to give up their lives, 50, 60 years, what they lived back then on average. They were willing to give up their shot on the moon buggy planet, living literally on a rock covered 70% by oceans, the perfect distance away from a fireball in the sky. The sun is 1.3 million times our planet. It would take you about a day in an airplane to fly around the Earth. It would take you 2.5 months to fly around the sun nonstop. So when you just think about the magic of what the human being is and how we never used to live in constant all day, every day suffering, and we certainly never had governments that had this much power and were this terrible at managing things that affect our time here, that the pursuit of happiness seems to have been a guarantee and an understanding that you'll be in pursuit of it. But you would never want to have a government that had cut that pursuit short and made it impossible. That this story, talking about the Empire State and talking about a family of 4 with a single mother and the struggles that she has to go through. I'm going to read her a little clip from the article real quick. "We're fine, Mom," one of the daughters said to her mother as she plopped down on the living room couch after basketball practice. "We're fine." Kids these days are doing a parent's job, unfortunately. They're reassuring their parents that we're okay because they see their parents suffering and struggling, looks on their faces all the time. The stress, the grind. It's a pressure cooker 70% of Americans said they can't get out of, and it's being caused by the government. Every single day, this is an issue being caused by the government's way of treating its problems. By passing those problems, absolving them as they can, pay that bill, get it off my desk, and passing the hell on to you. Passing the hell on to you. Mrs. Meisler's credit cards are maxed out. She's constantly behind on her cell phone bills. She usually pays her $865 mortgage late, like she did around Christmas, to have enough cash to buy her girls some extras. In December, she got a letter from the county social services department approving her for $253 in food assistance. "Sometimes I think," Mrs. Meisler said to herself, "where did I go wrong? Where did she go wrong?" She didn't. None of you have. She didn't go wrong. You guys just aren't aware of the cause of this hell, and I'm making you acutely aware of it right now. If you think of money as energy, and the money that the government used to get was scraps of energy from the financial grid, taxes, little pieces of the economy. And then what Nixon did in 1971 when he undid that limitation and created a power supply for the government, just for the government, that they could now create money out of thin air when it used to be created inside the economy by the swinging hammers inside the workers inside of our economy and repaying loans. I'm not a trained economist, and I'm not going to try to pretend I am one, but I've been researching what the hell is causing humanity to suffer. Why are people doing drugs all day? Why are kids not enjoying their time and not connected to the planet around them? And we'll get into so many different episodes and topics later on as time goes by that uncovers all of that. Some people will say it's social media. Okay, why are they on social media? Because it's cheaper. It's because parents are so overwhelmed with things they have to deal with all day long. There's schedules, and then there's just the stress that doesn't go away. She says, "Where did I go wrong?" Nearly 10 million American children are living in poverty. Look it up. Where is America on the list of the happiest nations on the planet? Look it up. Many of you probably think we're top 10. We used to be obviously in the top 5, probably number 1 for a long time. And I don't want to ruin the surprise. I'm not good at keeping surprises. We're 24th on the list, right after, I believe, Kuwait. 24th on the list. I have to think for a minute to even name 24 countries. Obviously, I can name the ones in Europe and the ones close to America, right? I could, I don't know, get 15. I'd have to think to name 24 countries. That's where America is on the list. And this is what she's describing, and this is what you said in the exit polls in the presidential election. And if I have any purpose and any usefulness whatsoever to anyone around me, which is all that drives my life, because I know that's what causes happiness, to be of use to others. And that's what I'm trying to do here. We're not blasting the government. We're not saying they're bad people. We're saying, though, the practice of what they're attempting to do to support our pursuit of happiness is ruining the experience utterly. And it is killing the currency that we all get paid in. It is literally killing that currency to where, you know, let's say that your family was out in a boat and the economy was in another one. And the government, and they were both sinking. And the government was given the choice to save one. It could save one ship, one boat. Which one do you think they would save? And that's how you need to understand this. What Ms. Meisler is describing, and what this Wall Street Journal article is describing, is that tens of millions of kids in America are right there at the line of living in poverty. That 10 million kids today live in poverty. But how is that possible in an economy that generates around $20-something trillion of revenue a year, or transactional business a year? Because here's the principle. The more money the government creates, the less we have. Because the value of the dollar keeps cheapening and cheapening and cheapening. An economist explained it to me like this. He gave me this very scary perspective. He said, so one day there's a day and you have to create $1 trillion a year out of thin air to pay your bills. Eventually you have to create that $1 trillion every 6 months. Eventually you have to create that $1 trillion every 90 days. Eventually you have to create that $1 trillion every 45 days, every 15 days, every 7 days, every 2 days, every day. That's math. I don't care how bloody our knees get, folks. We'd be praying like crazy for that never to happen. But math doesn't hear that. Good math into bad math fixes bad math. But bad math following after bad math, which is what the government has shown you is mostly what they're capable of doing, they just keep repeating the same process, that math worsens. And the second principle is you can't have something for nothing. So if Ms. Meisler decides to take on 2 or 3 jobs, and she earns like $38,000 a year, and by government's measurements, that's not poor, $38,000 a year. You know, the average income in America in 1971 was $9,000 a year, and it cost 18 grand to buy a house. You'd save for 2 years for a down payment. Now, how many kids today think that they're going to be buying a house ever in their lifetime? I know 30-year-olds that know that likely is not going to be possible. They're not even focused on it. People aren't even getting married. Marriage is down right now because it's so expensive. Having kids, back in the 70s, I think it cost, and I'll confirm this on the next episode, folks who can look it up and write me and correct me, but I believe it was around 100 grand to raise a kid to 18 years old back in the 70s. Today it would cost you almost $500,000. So when Mrs. Meisler says, what did I do wrong? She didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. But the point of all of this is to understand that though we probably can't change what the government's doing with our occasional votes every couple of years, every 4 years for a president, every 2 years for parts of the House and the Senate, what can you do? If you're living in the Empire State and you're struggling with this financial hell that you're not going to overcome, because even if you make a little bit of progress, remember the stats since 2010, commodity prices, eggs, coffee, wheat, sugar, gas, everything that you're looking at right now, everything in my little space here, in some way or another is a commodity. We live off the earth. Everything we use comes from the earth. right? So if money isn't real, it creates a false energy, financial energy, that overstimulates our financial world and everything that that connects to, which is also the reason, if there is such a thing, as global warming. Because there's so much financial action. It is speeding up humanity faster than the speed of life the planet is willing to support, causing nothing but conflict, resentment, fear, jealousy, envy, greed, bitterness, depression, war, friction, arguments, more crime. If you look around and say, why is there so much murder? Why is there so much hate? It's because people go to sleep and wake up every morning stressed, knowing they can't spend any time connecting with the world around them because they have to get going, they have to create economic activity, they have to answer the texts and the emails, they have to get that report done. 3 conference calls today, Zoom calls, then the kids, then this, then that. When's time for dating? When's time for anything? So here's another perspective on what I'm trying to illuminate for you guys. I was watching a TV show, great show, and there was a scene in there where the mother and the wife and husband had separated. They lost a kid at 6 years old. And she was recalling that one of the last experiences she had with him, they were in an ice cream store, and he had his face pressed up against the glass, and he was, in the lovely moment of wondering what flavor ice cream to get, right? And she was in a hurry. She had somewhere to go. So she started pressing him to make his choice. But the loveliness of that experience is watching with amazement of how incredible it is for a young human being to have the chance to then take its time and pick the magical flavor of ice cream out of whatever 30 flavors there were to choose from. And she makes him choose, and he still can't decide, so she chooses for him. And he had passed away shortly after that. And I thought to myself, the Indians were never, ever late for anything. The Indians were never late. They were never rushed. They were never distracted. Just as a comparison, I know we all want our air conditioning and our MRI machines and all this stuff, the Netflix and everything we have today, but there was a cost to get those technologies and those luxuries. But if it weren't for the government printing all this money to pay its bills instead of coming to us and telling us the truth and having us all pitch in as a country, and them trying to take credit for the solutions that they're never going to provide us, and the lying that they do from the podium, inflation, counted the old-fashioned way, is up around 9 or 10%. It's not what they're using. The recipe they use today to generate that inflation number of 2 or 3% is hooey, as that number used to be. The purpose of it was to tell us how far will our money go. So long ago, when a pack of gum cost 25 cents and today it costs $1.25, my money's going 1/5 the distance it used to go. But my wages, since 2010, is only up 80%. So it's up like 2.5% versus the 8% cost increases. So my wages go like this and the costs go like that. And after a decade or so, you're drowning. And after a few decades, now you have generations that have given up and are so confused and mystified by what the hell their grandparents got to do when they sit on their knee and understand and listen to those stories about what our grandparents tell us life used to be like. They can't connect to any stanchions inside of our world that would cause them to think that any of that life is going to be available for them. My dad grew up making his own toys for Christmas. He grew up on the Canadian border, right? Shortly after the Depression, after World War II, as it was ending, he was born. And you think about, he isn't crying tales of woe about how he's so distracted. He's retired now, obviously, he's in his 80s. But he's not, when you talk about his childhood, you talk about his time and his career, he's not talking about the stresses that we deal with today. He's talking about, he bought homes, he bought cars, he paid cash for them. They didn't finance these things. And he worked for the government. So he didn't have a big lofty income. He had an upper average income, right? There's more on my childhood that I'll get into on other episodes, but in this article, the Empire State has failed because as the government printed money to pay its bills, the companies decided, man, we need to cut costs somehow. And I'm going to get to the next article here in a second that's going to tie all this together. Companies are there to make money. Cut costs, raise revenue, grow profit, right? Sometimes you can't cut costs. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you have to focus on generating more revenue than you're currently generating. So the next thing that our government allowed to happen was our manufacturing firms to go set up shop in China. In fact, our government encouraged it. Since 1990, 74,000 manufacturing firms have closed their doors in America and set up shop overseas. Most of those are in China. Now, in 1990, China's GDP was $330 billion. And back then, Texas was 4 times that amount. Just the state of Texas. So, not putting anyone down, but back in the old days, and for a long, long time, China made fireworks and rice. Eventually, they made toys, made in Taiwan, which now just says made in China, because they're a bully on the little island nation of Taiwan, and they want that stuff to say made in China, even though a lot of it's made in Taiwan. So toys eventually were made in China. And the big box stores sat down all their suppliers and said, we want this widget to be made at $1.10. And they all had their factories in America, and they said, well, it costs us $4 to make that. Great. And go set up shop in China. And away the American jobs went. So where our government leadership over the last many decades has killed this country, this is the exact reason you are suffering and struggling today and are distracted and don't have time to let your little 6-year-old spend whatever minutes they want to take to pick out an ice cream flavor while you're in a rush. It's because the government is overpowering our financial lives with printed money and causing the cost of everything we have to spend money on to enjoy our time here to be out of reach, and causing a whole bunch of Americans to be juggling what they're going to pay on time at the end of the month, and causing the depression that leads to us having to check out. Go back to the Egyptians. Where is the report of a society that needed to anesthetize itself en masse every day? So just recently in the Miami Herald, a couple days ago, the Coast Guard was part of an effort that seized 67,000 pounds of pure cocaine in Port Everglades, Fort Lauderdale. So I know some of you are probably going, who would be so stupid to send 67,000 pounds of coke in one shipment? I don't want to focus on that. In the article, one of the spokesperson is quoted, Team Hamilton, with our partners, worked incredibly hard the last several months to safeguard the American public from the dangers of illicit narcotics entering the United States. Credit to Captain John B. McWhite. And I'm proud of him. He has a job to do. He's there to bust shipments of coke coming into America. Again, a symptom. That's a symptom. Let's take that down a few levels. Why? Americans want those drugs. We ordered them. That's Uber Eats for narcotics. Wherever they're coming from, Colombia, wherever, South America. Those drugs weren't showing up and it was like some new thing. And they're going to have a sale. Sidewalks, they're going to be in Costco, giving out little samples of coke, going, hey, we're just wondering if you guys are interested in this product. We're just curious while we introduce it, see if you're into it. Because a society 100 years ago, 50 years ago, wasn't interested. So if they did set up shop in your local supermarket with a little kiosk handing out little sniffers of cocaine, no one would have tried it. They would say, well, what does that do? Oh, well, it causes you to not pay attention. It gives you a high. Oh, I've been getting that high from church and my kids and my grandkids and my accomplishments at work and time with the family and camping trips and fish I've caught. I wouldn't need something that I would put in my body to give me an artificial feeling. I've been living life. I've been in America, the greatest country on earth, because of the sacrifices made by the people who started the place. Not because it was a handout. How does a country go from those not willing to cross the Atlantic Ocean and stay back in socialist Europe, but that Atlantic Ocean was a filter that did test the ones that were willing to leave socialism in Europe and come to a place with nothing. And 7 out of 10 of those original trip makers died, either on the 2-month trip crossing the Atlantic or once they got to the shores of America. It was those sacrifices, it was that mindset that said, no, I'm not going to be told how to live. I want you to understand, folks, when you are born, you are not subject of the state. You are not property. You are an incredible, magical creation that has lost sight of driving a moon buggy on a planet. The country's asking for those drugs because society is so miserable and it needs relief. And it can get it from gambling. It can get it from the bottle. It can get it from the bong hit. It can get it from the line. It can get it from the needle. It can get it from the pill. And when those don't work, it can just beat something to death. It can live in shame because man's earnings aren't enough to overwhelm his bills. So that's a feeling of impotence. Because nature didn't create anything on this planet that couldn't flourish. The rain clouds are not struggling to evaporate waters from the ocean and then irrigate the planet beneath them. There is no struggle outside your windows except for the lens you're looking at upon humanity. America needs these drugs. You aren't doing anyone a favor. The war on drugs, when you read my book, 1971, it's going to cover a lot of this. It's going to show you the only way a society at large is going to turn from the magic of being a human being to being checked out is it's seeking relief. It's seeking, even though it's artificial and temporary for just a second, it's seeking peace. And it's just at the end of its rope. The mind doesn't do well with unresolved things. It's kind of like a filing cabinet. Black, white, up, down, salt, sweet, salty, good, bad, like it, don't like it, polite, rude, whatever. It just files everything. It doesn't do good with gray. So when it can't figure out why it's struggling, why life around it's so hard, one, it'll question itself, like the poor single mom did in the earlier article. Where did I go wrong? What am I doing wrong? Imagine living with that shame and guilt, and I know a ton of you are, and that's who I'm hoping to speak to. I'm hoping to at least empathize with you and help you understand there are some changes you might need to make, and I know it's hard to uproot and maybe reposition your life. But I looked it up. The 5 easiest states to live in from a cost perspective, and yes, the earnings are lower too. Tennessee's number 1, Arkansas. I know it's probably not a choice of most people to go move to, but you get 80 years here, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years here on this planet in this magical time of being a human being who has a soul maybe shared of God's soul in a human machine that carries that around, and that soul knows everything and fears nothing. And the human machine that carries it around knows nothing and fears everything. And that's the conundrum we're always going to live in. And it's hard to resolve that stuff. But the more you're in tune and connected to the world around you, Mother Nature herself, your creator, that's where you'll find happiness and peace. We can't change this stuff with our votes. America wants those drugs. It needs relief. It's that or stop the printing press. It's that or stop the printing press. The first thing it would have to stop is the lying. Legends and lies. That's what this show's always going to be about. And it's not going to be about blame. It's going to be about the little offering that I might be able to have, that I've done research to try and understand and put it out in a book that comes out September 18th on Amazon, 1971. The day that humanity started to inherit problems it didn't know where they were coming from, and doesn't have the ability to solve. When the plague came, we got through it. When the king came by and took our kids for his stupid war, we got through it. When little Tommy passed away at childbirth, the family got through it. We were connected as a humanity because of those problems. And those problems were temporary. The problems we're dealing with today are permanent until this math problem brings about the corrective measures that it will bring about, just like an overcrowded deer population. Eventually, there's not enough vegetation in the woods to support the size of the herd, and the herd sees some setbacks. And then the vegetation has a chance to regrow and support the right-sized deer herd. It's the same thing. These rules and laws of Mother Nature are immutable. Man's laws are written down somewhere on a piece of paper, and they're enforced with threats. Mother Nature's laws don't have to be written down anywhere, and they're not enforced with threats. There's outcomes if we cross them up and aren't paying attention, like people climbing Mount Everest. It's not really a habitable place to go climb. But the same people probably climbing Mount Everest are the same ones that came to America, that set up this incredible country, that paid attention to principles, lived mostly in truth. The people, and let's remember this, the people made America great. It wasn't the government. We didn't outsource that. Hey, we got these colonies here. Heard you guys are really good at putting countries together. Tell us what to do. No. It was the minds, the magical minds of the human being set free to create and invent as they wanted to and deal with their skirmishes and their tough times. Yes, it's too bad guns exist. There's a lot of gun violence, but you're not going to have something without something else. You're not going to have the creation of a country without having to fight for it. Cuba wants to eventually be not communist. Boy, the tourism would just be incredible. Incredible piece of land. They're going to have to sacrifice something to overthrow the way that Cuba runs. Anywhere you live, you're not happy about it, gather together. Figure out how you can live in a happy way or make changes. We aren't going to change this government. But I'm trying to say, to empower you, these things that you can't fight and overcome, you change. You recognize that life is occurring where your feet are. Look at your feet all throughout the day and ask yourself, where am I right now? What moment am I in? How do I slow this down? They say the quarterbacks that do really well in football are the ones that start to understand and see the defense coming at them. That the game slows down because they're paying attention. They're aware of what is actually going on around them and what the accomplishment is. The accomplishment isn't necessarily getting your boss to give you a 50% raise. The accomplishment is fitting your life into a way that what you do earn is somehow more than what your bills are. And even in that struggle, we come together as a country. Our towns come together. People living on the river or on a certain street or on a lake or on a mountaintop or out in the fields, that they come together knowing that we're all going through this the same. We're not going to judge our neighbors. We're not going to point fingers. We're not going to laugh. We're going to come together with common empathy and understanding that this is our time on the planet. Some believe we get many lives here. Some believe we get one. I'm pretty sure we at least get one because I'm here and you're here. And don't forget, you're the ones who won. You're the fighting spirit inside of you. When that creation of a baby came together, you already won a fight. That's why you're here. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. And if you're thinking that you're so overwhelmed that turning to a drug is going to provide you the relief or somehow those good feelings, they do for a while. And because that's an artificial way to create those wholesome feelings you're seeking, it's going to come with side effects. It's not a choice to make. I know, I saw Nancy Reagan just say no when the war on drugs started in the 80s, which was 15 years after Nixon ended the government living within its financial means and created the government hooked it up to its own financial power supply, which is burning your currency at both ends. The dollar today is only worth 3 cents. And 15 years later, mothers are in the workforce because dad's paychecks aren't enough to cover the bills anymore, and kids, latchkey kids, and all these terms are born out of the way that humanity in America changed. And just so you understand, when the government prints all commodity prices are going up around the world, and it's causing all the countries to hate your dollar, which is why the BRICS nations are forming and why there's all these challenges to the dollar and all these pressures from outside of our country, because as the Fed pays its bills with printed money and those commodity prices go higher, they go up for everyone on the planet. And their earnings certainly aren't going up even as fast as yours are. And yours aren't going up enough to overwhelm this. So I'll end with this. When I was a kid, I used to know all the names of all the trees in the woods. I was outdoors all the time. Fishing, bike riding, had a go-kart, BB gun wars, blowing stuff up. And so maybe I'm lucky that I can reach back to when I used to help lime a soccer field and we played on real grass, and I got to pitch in at 6 in the morning with my dad and go around and lime soccer fields, and I would play on one of them later that day. That those are my roots. And maybe, born in 1970, I'm part of the last generation that remembers any of that stuff. For the kids today, 20, 30, 40-year-olds, I wish that the way humans had grown up, enjoying their time actually outdoors with the planet we're living on, amazed by a sunset or a sunrise, amazed by lightning strikes and strong winds and maybe a tree falling over and nearby your house and just all that stuff, that was part of your time here instead of nuisance or things you just read about, that you experienced them, that somehow our families find a way to communicate with each other and get with and focus solely on, primarily on, this is our time here on a planet, the perfect distance away from a fireball in the sky. And when we go to the ground, we want a lot of people there that day talking about how great, how good we were and how much time and focus we applied to maximizing the experience of literally living on planet. That's my wish for you, and hopefully the episodes that follow will be full of useful information and encouragement in ways that you might not find elsewhere. Thank you for putting up with me. Thanks for watching.